They came before the sun had fully risen, when the world was still caught between darkness and light, when the air held that cold clarity that comes just before dawn. We heard them first. The sound of bronze against bronze, the rhythmic march of feet that moved as one body, the low hum of voices speaking a dialect we recognized but did not use. Spartans. The word itself was enough to make mothers pull their children closer, to make old men reach for weapons they had not touched in decades, to make the priests hurry to the temples to beg the gods for protection that would not come. By the time the sun touched the hills, our gates were breached. By midday, our streets ran red. By nightfall, our homes were ash, our warriors were gone, and we, the women, were taken. My name was Thalia. I say was, because I am not certain that name still belongs to me, or if it ever did after that day. Names are fragile things. They require a world that recognizes them, voices that speak them with love or respect or simple acknowledgement. When that world burns, when those voices are silenced, a name becomes just a sound, empty and meaningless. Before they came, my life was small but complete. I lived in a city-state whose name you would not recognize, one of the many that dotted the Greek world like stars in a constellation, each one believing itself important, each one convinced of its own permanence. We were not warriors. We were farmers, traders, potters, weavers. We had festivals in honor of Demeter, of Dionysus, of the local gods whose shrines stood on every corner. We had a theater where plays were performed during harvest time. We had an agora where merchants sold figs and olives and clay lamps painted with scenes of heroes and gods. I worked in my father's workshop. He made amphorae, large clay vessels for storing wine and oil, and I painted them. I was good at it. I had a steady hand, an eye for detail. I painted grapevines and dolphins and geometric patterns that pleased the customers. My father said I had a gift. My mother said I should marry soon, that gifts did not feed families, that I was 17 and too old to still be unmarried. We argued about this often, in the way families argue when they love each other and believe they have time to resolve everything. We did not have time. The Spartans came because of a dispute I did not understand, and still do not. Something about allegiances, about tributes owed, about insults given or received by men whose egos were larger than their wisdom. Politics, war, the things that men decide and women endure. They did not negotiate. They did not offer terms. They simply came, and when they came, they were like a force of nature, like an earthquake or a flood, something you cannot reason with or escape. Their shields were lambda-marked, painted red, held in a line so tight you could not see where one man ended and another began. Their spears were long, their helmets covered their faces, and they moved with a precision that made our own defenders look like children playing at war. Our men fought. I will not say they did not fight. They fought with everything they had, but they were farmers with spears, merchants with swords they barely knew how to hold, and the Spartans were Spartans, trained from childhood, hardened by a culture that valued nothing except strength and obedience and victory. The battle, if it can even be called that, lasted hours. But the outcome was never in doubt. I was in my home when the gates fell. I heard the roar, the crash of wood splintering, the surge of voices that followed. My mother grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the back of the house, toward a storage room where we kept grain and oil. My younger brother was already there, his eyes wide, his hands shaking. My father was gone, somewhere in the streets, trying to defend what could not be defended. We stayed in that room for hours. We listened to the sounds outside, the clash of bronze, the screams, the crackling of fire, the terrible heavy silence that followed the screams. My mother held my brother and whispered prayers to gods whose attention was elsewhere. I pressed my hands over my ears, but I could still hear. You cannot unhear certain sounds. They carve themselves into your memory like words into stone. When the door finally opened, it was not my father. It was a Spartan warrior. his armor splattered with blood that was not his face hidden behind his helmet except for his eyes, which were flat and cold and showed no emotion at all. He looked at us the way you might look at objects you were cataloguing for inventory. He said something in Doric Greek, a command I did not fully understand. My mother stood, positioning herself between him and us, and she spoke in the formal dialect used for negotiations. "Please, we are not warriors. We have nothing of value. Let us go." He did not respond to her. He simply stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and pulled her toward the door. She struggled. My brother screamed and tried to hold on to her, and the Spartan shoved him aside so casually that my brother hit the wall and crumpled. I lunged forward without thinking, and the Spartan caught me by the hair, pulling me off balance, dragging me after my mother into the street. The street was unrecognizable. Bodies lay where they had fallen. Smoke poured from burning buildings. Other Spartans moved through the chaos with calm efficiency, separating survivors into groups, binding hands, issuing orders in voices that expected obedience and received it. I saw neighbors I had known my entire life, women who had taught me to weave, children who had played in the agora, all of them being herded like livestock toward the center of the city. My father was not among the living. I learned this not because I found his body, but because I did not. The dead were left where they lay, the living were taken, and my father, who had run toward the sound of battle with a borrowed sword and more courage than sense, was simply gone. They bound our hands with rough cord that cut into the skin. They tied us in lines, one woman connected to the next, so that if one fell, we all stumbled. My mother was ahead of me. My brother was gone, taken with the other boys to a different group. I called his name, and a Spartan struck me across the face with the flat of his hand, not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to teach me that speaking without permission was forbidden. We walked. For days we walked, south toward Sparta, though I did not know that at first. We walked through valleys and over hills, past other cities that had been spared or had submitted without resistance, through landscapes that should have been beautiful but felt like passages through a nightmare. We were given water sparingly, food even less. At night we were allowed to collapse where we stopped, still bound, still connected, huddling together for warmth because the nights were cold, and we had only the clothes we had been wearing when we were taken. The Spartan warriors did not speak to us. They spoke to each other in low voices, using words we could not fully understand, references to people and places and military matters that meant nothing to us. They treated us with the same indifferent efficiency they had shown during the battle. We were cargo, we were spoils, we were proof of victory. We were not people. One woman, older than my mother, tried to run on the third night. She waited until she thought the guards were distracted, slipped her bonds somehow, and ran toward the tree line. She made it perhaps 20 paces before they brought her down. They did not kill her. They dragged her back, retied her with rougher knots, and beat her in front of all of us so that we would understand what rebellion earned. She did not try again. None of us did. We arrived in Spartan territory after 8 days. I knew we had arrived because the landscape changed. The farms were more ordered. The people we passed did not look at us with pity or curiosity, but with indifference, as if lines of bound women were so common they were barely worth noticing. We were taken to a camp on the outskirts of the city itself, a place where prisoners and spoils were processed, distributed, assigned. The Spartans separated us again. Older women to one side, younger women to another, children torn from mothers despite their screams. My mother was pulled away from me. I reached for her, shouted her name, and was struck again, harder this time, hard enough that my vision blurred and my knees buckled. When I could see again, she was gone, and I have never seen her since. The younger women, myself included, were brought before officers who inspected us with the same cold assessment the first warrior had shown in my home. They checked our teeth, our hands, our bodies. They discussed us in Doric Greek that I could only partly follow. Some women were chosen immediately, led away by warriors who had claimed them as personal property. Others, like me, were assigned to communal duties, sent to work in the households of Spartan citizens or in the barracks where the warriors trained. I was sent to the household of a Spartan officer. His wife, a woman with a face like carved granite and eyes that never softened, put me to work immediately. I ground grain, I hauled water from the well, I washed clothes in the cold stream until my hands cracked and bled. I served meals and cleaned floors and did not speak unless spoken to, which was almost never. The Spartan women were not like the women I had known. They were strong, disciplined, cold. They ran their households with military precision. They did not gossip or laugh or show affection openly. They raised their sons to be warriors and their daughters to be the mothers of warriors. They looked at me and the other captive women with contempt, not because we had done anything to them personally, but because we represented weakness, defeat, everything their culture despised. At night, I slept in a small room with 3 other captive women. One was from my city. The other 2 were from places I had never heard of, taken in earlier campaigns. We did not speak much. Speaking required energy we did not have, hope we could not afford. But sometimes, in the darkness, one of them would whisper a prayer or a memory, and the rest of us would listen, and for a moment we were not alone. The Spartan warriors came to the household occasionally. The officer who owned the house, the man whose meals I served and whose floors I scrubbed, regarded me the way he might regard a chair or a table, a tool that served a function. But there were others, younger warriors, men still proving themselves, who looked at us differently, who saw in us not tools, but rewards, validation of their victories. I learned to avoid their gaze. I learned to make myself small, invisible, to move through rooms like a shadow. I learned which corners were safest, which times of day offered the most protection, which tasks would keep me in the presence of the Spartan wife, whose coldness was a shield I could hide behind. But invisibility only works for so long. There was a night, months after my arrival, when one of the younger warriors came to the household while the officer was away on campaign. He had been drinking. I could smell it on him, the sour tang of wine and sweat. He found me in the storage room where I was counting amphorae, ensuring the inventory matched the records. He stood in the doorway, blocking the light, and he said something in Doric that I did not understand but whose meaning was clear. I stepped back, he stepped forward. I looked for an escape, but there was none. He reached for me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. The Spartan wife appeared almost instantly. She looked at him, at me, and her expression did not change. She said one word, sharp and cold, and he stopped. He looked at her, argued briefly, but she repeated the word, louder, and he left. She turned to me, and for a moment I thought she might show some acknowledgement of what had almost happened, some solidarity, some recognition that we were both women in a world ruled by men and violence. Instead, she said, "Do not create disruptions in this household. You exist to serve. If you cannot do so quietly, you will be sent elsewhere, and elsewhere is worse." Then she left, and I sank to the floor and shook until I could not shake any more. Time moved strangely after that. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months, seasons changed. I stopped counting. I stopped expecting rescue. I stopped imagining escape. I learned the Spartan language fully, not because I wanted to, but because survival required it. I learned their customs, their rituals, their expectations. I learned to move through their world like a ghost, present but not present, alive but not living. Some of the women I had arrived with disappeared. Some were moved to other households. Some died, from sickness or exhaustion or simply giving up. One woman, a girl really, no older than 15, hanged herself in the night. They cut her down in the morning and burned her body without ceremony, and no one spoke of her again. Others adapted. They learned to smile at the right times, to lower their eyes, to accept their new names, their new roles. Some bore children, sons who would be raised as Spartans, daughters who would be raised to bear more sons. I do not judge them. Survival takes many forms, and we all do what we must to see another sunrise. But I never forgot. I never forgot the sound of my city burning. I never forgot my mother's face as she was pulled away. I never forgot my father who died defending walls that could not be defended. I never forgot my brother, whose fate I never learned. I carried those memories like stones in my chest, heavy and cold, impossible to set down. Years passed. The Spartan officer died in battle, and his wife died of a fever the following winter, and the household was dissolved, its property redistributed. I was old by then, no longer useful for anything except light tasks that required little strength. They sent me to work in the temple, cleaning and maintaining the statues, tending the offerings brought by citizens, seeking favor from gods who, I had learned, did not intervene in the affairs of men and women as often as the priests claimed. It was in the temple that I finally spoke my name again. Not to anyone in particular, just to the empty air, to the stone walls, to the gods, or the silence, or whatever might be listening. "I am Thalia," I whispered. "I am from a city that no longer exists. I had a father who made amphorae. I had a mother who wanted me to marry. I had a brother who loved stories. I was a person before I was a prisoner. I was someone before I was nothing." The words echoed briefly and then faded, and nothing changed. And I do not know why I expected anything to change. But saying them mattered, remembering mattered. I am old now, my hands are gnarled, my back is bent, my eyes are dim. I have outlived most of the Spartans who took me, outlived the warriors who paraded us through the streets, outlived the cold wife who saved me from one horror only to deliver me into another. I have outlived my usefulness, and I am left alone in the temple. A relic of a war no one remembers, a victim of a conquest that history records as just another minor victory for Sparta. History will remember Sparta. It will remember Leonidas and Thermopylae and the 300. It will remember the phalanx and the discipline and the warrior culture that made them legends. It will speak of courage and honor and sacrifice. But it will not remember us, the women taken, the cities burned, the families destroyed, the children stolen, the names forgotten. We are footnotes, if we are mentioned at all. We are the invisible cost of glory, the silent price of empire, but I remember. And as long as I draw breath, as long as my voice can still form words, I will speak our names into the void, and hope that someone, somewhere, hears. If you are still here, listening to my voice across the centuries, then you now carry our memory. You know what history tried to bury beneath marble and bronze, and stories of heroes. Stay, subscribe, before time buries us again, before our voices are lost completely, because some truths must be remembered, no matter how long ago they happened, and some silences must finally be broken.